Welcome to the first panel, and it's always exciting to be the first panel because hopefully we can give this show a big boost. We have four very eminent speakers with regard to what we call backstory, which is going to be history, story, background, and tales. And as I say, we have four very eminent panelists dealing with a variety of subjects. We hope to have 15 minutes per speaker, and then if everything works out, and these things always do somehow, we should have 15, 20 minutes to have a panel discussion and everyone joining in with questions or thoughts. So let's take a look at our list. We're going to start with David Gissen. I just want to say a few words about him. David is a historian, theorist, designer. He works in the intersection of architectural and geographical theory. He teaches here, fortunately for us, at CCA, both in architecture and visual studies. He has edited what looks like a very interesting book. I haven't read it, but I look forward to looking at it, called Big and Green. And he's apparently now finishing another work that sounds equally exciting, Minor Nature, Architecture and its imminent environments. His curatorial work has been staged in numerous galleries, and I look at this list of his awards, and it's most imposing indeed. Graham Foundation grants, a Chelsea Award at CCA, so we're very fortunate that he's going to start us off. And my understanding is that he's going to talk about topics that come out of his new book. The title is Subnature, Architecture's Other Environment, and maybe a word or two, I believe, about debris. Is that right, David? We'll see. Okay, well, please come up, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks to Kim and Terza for inviting me for this great event. I was asked. There's actually an interesting intersection between what Kim asked me to talk about and what Princeton Architectural Press, the publisher of this book that I have coming out, asked me to write about. Princeton Press approached me 2 years ago when I was in the middle of finishing up my dissertation at the University of London, and they asked me if I would be interested in writing a book that basically provided a new history of architecture and environmentalism, or architecture in the environment, which is obviously a very popular and intriguing subject at this particular moment. And so when I was working on my dissertation, I was, through the course of researching ideas about nature and architecture throughout history, I came across forms of nature that I found very little discussed in contemporary discussions of the kinds of things that people invoke when they talk about architecture and the environment. I found many things that were left out, and one of the characteristics that intrigued me was this other form of nature, which I call subnature, which was always envisioned as somehow threatening to architecture, as somehow threatening not both to the material of architecture, but also to the ideas that constituted architecture. And this other type of more fearsome nature that's within the history of architecture, I thought deserved a history. But in addition to that, what I also found equally compelling was that there are many contemporary architects who were trying to embrace what I'm calling subnature, this fearsome, denigrated, lesser nature that moves through the history of architecture, trying to figure out how to embrace it and bring it into the contemporary discourse of space, architecture, form, and structure. So this is the cover of the book. It'll be out in about 3 or 4 months. And on the cover of the book, you'll see this somewhat strange wall here. And this is a project by Jorge Otero Pelos, who's a preservationist at Columbia University. And Jorge calls himself an experimental preservationist. And this project is a preservation of dust and dirt and pollution inside of a factory in Bolzano, Italy. And so Jorge is very interested in what does it mean to preserve the very abject materials of the architectural environment? What are the ethics of that? And what does it tell us about the history of architecture? So my book is basically divided up into 12 chapters that trace different kinds of the forms of what I'm calling subnature, things such as dust, weeds, inundations of water, mud, insects. And I just want to show you a few images from the book just to describe some of the themes, but also if if time permits, I'll give you a little run-through of one of the chapters. So subnature is a very complex and difficult concept within architecture. And it presents a lot of challenges to the historian as the subject of nature would present to an architectural historian. You cannot find one single approach to subnature, nor one single concept that can sum up precisely what it means through all times. When you look at a specific quality or material that architects at one time find threatening, you can very easily at another time find architects trying to figure out a way for space to begin to approach this troubling matter. But we can characterize within particular times generally what these more fearsome types of nature begin to signify. This is an image by Giovanni Battista Piranesi of the aqueducts outside of Rome and Albano. And this mud, dusty, puddle-strewn, and weed-covered interior is meant for him to show the former grandeur of Roman space and its consumption by time and history. In the 19th century, what I'm calling subnature can be seen as something that is beginning to consume the industrial city, the modern industrial city and its processes. This is a drawing by the urbanist Hector Gavin of the pestilent disease mist of Bethnal Green. And what he was trying to draw was the odors of sewerage, of fecal matter, of all kinds of pleasant things, of miasmatic gases, as they were called in the 18th and 19th century, and these brown clouds that were moving through the neighborhood. And he was using this drawing to argue for the inequities and the spatial problems within this neighborhood. But I also find it interesting because subnature becomes this type of cartographic project in much of the 19th century, whether an architect's examining something like this or the floods and stagnancies of water and sewage in the city. So in the early 20th century, there's very much of a continuation of the 19th century project. Some of you may recognize this drawing. This is by Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier is one of these architects that I find completely obsessed with the subnatural in architecture. We think a lot of contemporary environmentalists invoke the efforts by Le Corbusier to bring nature into architecture, and the drawings of his work that did this. But Le Corbusier was very obsessed with the more denigrated aspects of nature in the urban environment, and these are his sketches of the dust and effluvium, as he called it, of the roadways of the city, and his new city of towers, and its more distant response to it. But it's this thing that's held close to architecture always to begin to justify certain moves by the architect. After World War II, images of debris, desolation, begin to describe a landscape in which nature as we know it is not possible. This is a proposal in a form of commentary by Arato Isozaki, after the bombing of Hiroshima in Japan. He's one of the post-war Japanese metabolist architects. And he's trying to understand how you could reconstruct a world that has been transformed into debris. And so he made these really haunting images in which, if you've ever seen this collage, and you look very closely, it's assembled of tiny little fragments of shattered building. And it is, in some ways, it's within the avant-garde tradition of architecture in terms of showing architecture or the modern world as one without nature. Now, more recently, modern architectural historians have used images such as weeds, stagnant puddles, etc., to describe ideas about the history of architecture itself. This is from Leonardo Benevelo's History of Modern Architecture. It's a book that used to be very popular in the 60s and 70s, but architects have largely forgotten it. And I think it shows us many images about concepts of architecture and its environment. Benevolo photographed the quote-unquote masterpieces of modern architecture as he saw them and emphasized the denigration within their own environments. And in some sense, he's using this form of subnature as a form of realism in architecture, to show them in ways that the professional photographs of these buildings would never show these buildings. But on the other hand, he's showing them as fragile objects and showing the modern world as one in which management is a key function of its purpose.